What's up, everybody? It's your friend Lukie, and I am here with my dear friend Dakota, and we do a boxing show every Sunday, and I think it's a very good one. So we are back
I do
to
too.
talk about. Yeah, Dakota thinks it too. Dakota, how are you doing?
Been better, been worse, but it was a pretty decent weekend of fights. I got to spend fight week at Madison Square Garden this week for Keyshawn Davis and Denys Berinchyk. Pretty wild fight week. But yeah, it was a great week of boxing, at least for me.
I think it was a great week for everybody, to be honest with you. I think it was a great. It's a great 3-week stretch for a hardcore fight fan, I would say.
For sure.
Very exciting period of time. Keyshawn Davis, what did you see from this performance?
Man, right now I kind of just see a guy who's at a different level from everyone he's getting in the ring with, and he's getting in the ring time after time with very good quality fighters, and in this case, a good quality champion and Olympian, and he made him look like a beginner, man. He completely outclassed him, and he was in a league of his own, and he's separating himself, I think, from basically everyone at lightweight outside of like Tank and Shakur. He's completely separated himself from the pack with a performance like that.
It's quite remarkable, right? Because what he's doing is he's not quite moving as fast as Lomachenko or Shakur. I think Shakur won a belt in 13 fights. He won a belt in 14 fights, but he's in the ballpark. And that's something in and of itself, is that he kind of skipped the prospect stage. He went into being a contender, and now he got a title fight really in his early teens as a professional. And outside of like some resistance Nahir Wu Albright, a very underrated fighter, gave him, we haven't really seen him tested. He's gone through even winning a world title, seemingly feeling as though he's better than all of his opposition. Exciting, interesting power puncher.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing too is, he's going to be looked at as like a skills guy, which he is, but I do think he's a devastating puncher in much the same way that we don't necessarily think of Terrence, as a puncher as like a primary attribute, but that is ultimately a big part of his and now Keyshawn's success, is that he's got serious one-punch power.
He definitely does. And I think that that's kind of what it was. The fight was ugly. It was a terrible fight until Keyshawn dropped him and stopped him. This was on pace to just be a fight no one wanted to see. Berinchyk, when he is doing his thing, it is just ugly and rough to watch. And he was doing his thing early. He wasn't winning rounds, but he was negating the action. He was holding. And I thought that he was going to do it for 12 rounds, but Keyshawn showed me he's got a gear that I didn't even know he had.
It's like Terrence with the Sean fight. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a great fight. It's not really going great for Terrence, but he just finds that moment to capitalize on. And that's exactly what Keyshawn did in this one, man. Like, I don't think Berinchyk was going to give him any great openings to get some offense off, but he found that quick little, 2 shots to the body that just folded Berinchyk in half.
So what's next?
Man, it's such a great division right now, bro. Like, it was in a period of transition, I think, with Haney and Ryan and Tio and some of the young stars of 4 or 5 years ago moving up in weight. And now you got Keyshawn, you got Murataya, you got a really talented guy in Duarte, although I think he's 140, actually. My apologies. But lightweight's a division that's in great hands. Of course, you still have Tank and Shakur. Shakur is going to be fighting next weekend against Floyd Schofield. I love that matchup. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing Keyshawn in big fights now. And whether it's Lomachenko, whether it's Murataya, I just think that he's a real guy at this weight, and he's starting to make his case as a star in the sport.
I hear you, bub. And I think that there's a real case that Keyshawn's, I was trying to make my list of lightweight and junior welterweights. Keyshawn's obviously a top 10. He holds a belt, but he's like possibly 5 or 6, and it's in 13 fights. And you could say he's moving as fast as a lot of these guys. You could make a case that he's nearly caught up to Gervonta Davis, as unpopular as that would be, because he's just moved so fast 2 titles. Whereas Davis got to a title, but he's had years and years and years, it feels like, of really successful financial fights, but maybe fights that as fans and historians, we don't love the matchups as much.
Well, I mean, listen, on multiple occasions now, Tank has had guys coming up in weight to fight him. Keyshawn just fought a legitimate titleist at his weight that was coming off a career-defining win. Tank is not taking those types of fights right now, and that's just the reality.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is.
Another one that I'd like to throw out there is William Zepeda, because I think that that's an interesting style contrast with him and Keyshawn. A little bit more of a traditional aggressive fighter, but a guy that does it at a certain level with a certain amount of volume. Of course, he's going to have to get past Tevin, but I think that that's an interesting fight at least. And if Tevin were to beat Zepeda, I would love to see Tevin and Keyshawn kind of match wits. You know what I mean?
No, I hear you. I hear you 100%. And also Zepeda and Tevin are going to be rematching coming up sometime. I just saw that that's a thing. So that's a thing.
Yep.
We have a lot to talk about. So are we good on Keyshawn, or do you have any more thoughts?
I mean, that as far as the performance goes, and I'm guessing you're not interested in talking about some of the antics and the what have you leading up.
Well, I mean, we should address it, but there was a act of racism, sending a banana and watermelon to his room, but we never got clarification of who sent it or why or what, but it was brought up in the press conference, and it's not acceptable. But for me, the world is very ugly, and I try to watch boxing as sport until racism is brought into the mix. So I think it needs to be brought up, but I'd prefer to not center the conversation around that, because Keyshawn had such a good performance. I don't think that needs to be the central focus.
I couldn't agree more. It felt unfortunate to me that had like a seat at the table at an event like this. There seems to be some level of like controversy, or I guess I can't tell if it's a rumor or not, but it's alleged that Teofimo Lopez is the one that sent the package. I don't know what
we're not even gonna get into that, because I mean that we deal in facts. So that's just people on the internet saying stuff. I don't like that stuff. I know pretty much everyone involved in this fight, and we need to talk about fighting. And when people are doing social media stuff, I'm just completely uninterested in that. So we're going to stay strictly to boxing, because I'm not fascinated or entertaining antics outside of the ring in this capacity, because people have had really crappy things happen to them.
Yeah, and it's also like legitimately hateful shit used in some sort of trolling manner. So I think you have the right idea, Bub.
Yeah. So what else did you want to talk about on this card? Co-feature Xander Zayas gets a stoppage win. What'd you think?
I thought it was a good performance, man. Spomer was a tough guy. He clearly wasn't on the same level, but he was game. He wasn't really going anywhere. Xander had to kind of put him out of his misery, and he was able to get the stoppage. I think it was in the 8th or the 9th round. Listen, I love what Xander's skill set. He does everything pretty well. He still has these little lapses for me where he stays in the pocket too long, or he just his defensive brain kind of turns off, and he gets caught, against a much less talented guy with stuff that might be more consequential at a higher level. So I still see those things, but this to me was a very good performance from him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem with Xander is he's very good. He turned pro young. There's high expectations, and it always feels like this is a great performance, and then Keyshawn one-upped him. And it feels like he's never had that night where he's been the star of the show, and he left where everyone's talking about him. Everyone left talking about Xander, and they talked about Abdullah. And I think that's the hard truth of this fight.
Hey, listen, he's in a talented class of young fighters, you know what I mean? And when you put them all in the same room and they perform, it's going to be tough to be the cream of the crop with that, you know, those being your classmates, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? It is what it is. There's nothing you can
I mean, we saw various stages of development, right? It's like every fighter develops different. Abdullah, 20 years old, he's already at least looks a little bit like a finished product.
But I think it's also Abdullah turned pro at 18, I believe, right?
Maybe 17.
Okay. So that's about the same. But I think the big issue is with Xander, the power isn't quite there for one reason or another at this next level. And you're wondering if that's just going to be a theme throughout his career, or if it's a 22-year-old that turned pro very early who's focusing on strength training, but there's a level of issue. Like there's a level of like, okay, the power's not there. And at this next level, you need some dynamic stuff to keep people interested.
I hear what you're saying. At the same time, he stops the guy with a body shot. I think that he's got a creative enough offense that lack of power, if he can focus on the other parts, is not going to hurt him. And I think he's got serviceable power.
I'm not opposed to what you're saying. I'm just saying that I think a lot of times with a lot of these fights, what I'm seeing is it's a what have you done for me lately sport. And it's people want to see dramatic impact punches that change a fight. And he's a break you down guy. And I think that he's got a temperament where he wants to get that fight knockout that gets the fans going. And I think there's just a lot of pressure on Xander. I feel like if there wasn't the same pressure of being a young fighter going for the title we've seen his whole career, I think he'd fight a little bit more free. But I think when you've grown up in the spotlight and every fight was an ESPN fight and people have seen your full development, I think there's a level of pressure that comes with that.
Do you think he's thinking too hard?
I just think it's hard to be 22 years old and grow up in front of everybody and have people who are on their cell phones far too much commenting and talking about things that really don't matter to your life. And you've grown up in a world where like the cell phones and random people are very important. So I think that like he's looking for a performance that's going to solidify him as what he is, a top guy. And I just think that performance hasn't quite come yet. And I think that there's a little bit of, you see it, he gets rocked in this fight. And I think he got rocked because he's looking for a 4th round knockout, so he could silence the haters or whatever, big emphatic statement. And I think I see that with not just him, but a lot of young fighters, right? I see that with Vito Mielnicki, right? Like Vito had lapses in his fight, and it feels like that's also partially due to being a young person that's grown up in a culture that's different than when I grew up.
I think even beyond cultural, it's like every fighter is different at 22 than they are at 28. And not every fighter is being highlighted and showcased at 22. But these specific fighters in their early 20s happen to be very special and are sort of breaking that rule. But at the same time, as talented as they all are, they all sort of have their moments. Other than Abdullah, funny enough, which I think is what right now is just separating like him and Keyshawn so much. But Keyshawn's a little older. But Abdullah and this class of guys that are like 22 and under, it just doesn't seem to phase him in any capacity. And he doesn't have some of the same growing pains that basically every other fighter has.
Should we do a joint segment of Abdullah and Vito next?
Sure.
Let's do that. So
Sure.
You take over.
Well, I guess Vito and Connor Coyle's fight was a little later on the card. So, that was a really fun action fight. I've known Connor Coyle for some time now. We met at a club show 3-4 years ago. When I saw him, it was a bunch of guys at a certain level, and Connor just looked like a more polished guy that was ready for something bigger than the show that he was on. He's had big opportunities get canceled multiple times, and it was just great to see him finally get to the dance. He's earned it. He's been at the top of the WBA now for a couple of years, and it was a great action fight. Vito came out really sharp, and it looked like Conor maybe, I don't know if it was nerves or it just took him a little bit to get warmed into the fight. He hasn't been active in the last few years. But what unfolded was a really fun action fight that I thought, Conor showed a lot of balls with the cuts, and to me, it was a highlight of the night as far as action fights go.
I mean, it was okay to me. I might be old, bitter, and going through things. But my frustration with the fight was Vito's a young guy, and I was hoping to see him go to another gear in the second half of the fight. And Connor Coyle, this was a big moment, and they just kind of stayed even in that second half. I was really wanting to see another one of the guys, and I get it. That means they're matched even. But it really makes me wonder about if they can get to that next level, because it felt like for both guys, this was about where they're at. Maybe they grow from it, but I was really expecting someone in that second half to separate.
Well, I do think they're very evenly matched. And I think for just obvious age reasons that Vito has some more upside. I think that there's still room for him to grow. I look at how he fights now compared to, in the bubble. He's much better now. There's no denying it, right? But it's all baby steps. It happens little bits at a time. And for Conor, he's in a now or never sort of part of his career. And I feel like at a minimum, this performance put him on the map as a middleweight that's at a certain level who shows up to fight.
No, I hear you, man. And what did you think of contrasting that with Abdullah?
He was incredible, man. And I thought Jaimes really came out game. He came out aggressive. He was on the front foot. He looked relatively sharp. And again, Abdullah just putting him on his ass every single round. Jaimes getting up and being game. But he's just real sharp, man. He's just real sharp. He's fast. He throws the right punches. He's got a beautiful sense of his range and his distance. He's really good defensively. Like, I could just go on and on. He's still a little one shot at a time for me right now, but man, it's really something special to watch.
He's got a different gear than it seems most young fighters have.
It's the composure too, man. It's the composure. It's not wasting anything. It's not having nervous energy. It's knowing how to position yourself. You know what I mean? Like, he's just got so many of the intangibles down that normally come later. And now it's about seeing, can a fighter this young do it at a higher level for a higher number of rounds, when he finds somebody that can take him those rounds.
No, I hear you. Did you want to talk about Jared Anderson at all?
Just a weird fight, bro. Tough to know really what to make of that, other than he just doesn't seem that interested in boxing. And he's making that obvious kind of on camera, which I think it's not good for getting people to be interested in you if you're not interested in the fight. So obviously all of the talent is so obvious with Jared. We've been talking about it since he went pro, but I don't want to see somebody fight that doesn't want to fight. That's not fun.
I think the hardest part was he wins the fight and he immediately leaves the ring. Like, there was just so obvious that he was over it.
He was just getting through it.
How did you feel about him talking back to my guy PJ in the corner, Prentice Brewer?
I just thought it was weird, man. I just thought it was weird. You're in a boxing match. Your coach is telling you to go to the body more, and your answer is, I hate hitting elbows. Like, it's just weird. I think that him at his best can be competitive with anybody at heavyweight, bro. He's got a lot of ability. I don't know if he's the best heavyweight, but I think he could be a guy. But at that level of interest, he's coming in 20 pounds heavier than his last fight. I just don't see how that approach can be successful at a high level. And a guy with substantially less talent than him hit him a lot.
Yeah, it was a strange fight. What did you think of our guy Nico Ali Walsh's fight?
It was tough. He had a tough guy in front of him. The guy was real rugged. He was throwing a lot of combinations. And I think that Nico's just a guy, as a fighter, at least, who's still finding his identity. And again, various stages of development. He doesn't have that deep amateur pedigree, so he's having growing pains in front of all of us, that not every fighter has in public. And a shout out to Guerra for showing up and just keeping a tempo. I thought Nico landed the cleaner, harder shots, but he was just getting out hustled. And that's some of the the nuances of the game as you move up. I don't see it as necessarily like an end of the line moment. I think people forget, like, Shane Mosley Jr. lost fights early in his career and has evolved and grown into a really solid, legitimate contender. And I think that Nico has the mentality to become that. It's just the question is, does he have the talent and the ability? But he wasn't in there with a slouch. He was in there with a guy that really wanted to win, that saw this as his opportunity. And it was a good performance from him.
Yeah, definitely. Let's transition over to Arnold Barboza beating Jack Catterall, unless there's anything else on the Top Rank card you want to talk about.
I think we've pretty much covered the bases, bro. I just real quick, Juanmita Lopez, the son of Juan Manuel Lopez, had his pro debut, and it just gave me a little flashback to my first night at the fights when I went to Miguel Cotto and Paulie Malignaggi way back when. And Juan Manuel Lopez was on the undercard. I hadn't heard of him at the time. It was maybe his third fight or his fifth fight or something. And, he was a guy that gave the Garden a lot of fun nights, multiple times that I was there. Juan Manuel Lopez was like a highlight of the night. So it was cool seeing his son make his pro debut, and his son is very talented.
Says Tio versus Keyshawn on the undercard of Canelo versus Bud. What do you think of that?
I like that fight. What weight they doing it at?
That's the big question. So Arnold Barboza, what did you think of Arnold Barboza, Jack Catterall?
Well, I think we knew, right? This one was gonna be a game of inches. And you have two more technical counter-punching type guys that are both like great defensively. So it took them both a while to find their range, but Arnold was just able to create some more openings than Catterall. And in a fight like that, that's what it takes, is just getting a little bit of an edge. I guess I wish that Arnold had been a little more active early in the fight. There were some rounds where they were close, and I felt like he could have pulled away with just a little bit more of a push. But it was a great performance from Arnold. He's finally getting the big fights, and he's winning them. And, I think we've kind of suspected for a long time that that's what he was capable of. But it is cool to see him finally get these opportunities.
What I saw also was a systematic breakdown. I saw him putting a lot of pressure on Catterall, because Catterall is a guy, very good fighter, but he likes to fight at a certain pace, a certain cadence. He doesn't like to throw too much. That being said, so he does what he does. And, I think Barboza won the fight in the second half by weaponizing pace on him. He forced a pace and then picked that pace up in the second half when Catterall really wanted to fight in spurts.
Well, and he was using that 2-1 beautiful, which is not a combination you're throwing necessarily if you're trying to get knockouts, but it is an effective combination in that southpaw orthodox battle. And he was just finding a way to land that consistently enough. And I also think his sharpness was bothering Catterall. I mean, I've yet to see Catterall reach with that right hand, and there was multiple times where he was reaching and falling off balance. And I think that's just a credit to how sharp Barboza was.
Kind of sucks, right? Because we're having to move the speed round this week. We're having to go fast and go through all these things quick. But this is a career-defining performance for Barboza, a guy who always was in the shadows of other fighters. And now he gets an interim title. I think a lot of us are expecting him to be the outright champion. I think a lot of us are expecting him to become the guy. Because Teofimo Lopez, I don't think, is probably going to defend that title against him. He's talking of bigger fights. So, I mean, it seems like he's probably going to get elevated to full champion, or he's going to be seen as the full champion by, I think, hardcore enthusiasts at the very least. So it's an emotional moment for him, but these 50-50 fights have a funny way of, we don't have that much to talk about if we have too many things to talk about, because they're so competitive. And it's like, Catterall to me didn't lose much in this fight. Catterall was exceptional in this fight. He's still a world title contender. And to me, I think Puello and Barboza are the two best fighters in the division, along with Hitchens. And I think that blows most people's mind if you were to say that.
Listen, bro, and we talked about that for like, I have no less interest in Catterall and Hitchens than I did before. I still think that he's a fantastic technician, and this one was a game of inches. I wouldn't mind seeing them run it back again. I know that a lot of times if it's not an action fight, people don't want to see a rematch, but this was such a splitting hairs fight that I wouldn't mind seeing it again. And it's just like a boxing head. I enjoyed watching them both kind of figure it out on the fly.
Yeah, it was something like, I mean, it was a hardcore enthusiast. Did you catch any of the undercard? You told me you didn't catch any of the undercard.
No, that undercard I watched a decent amount. It was the Golden Boy one that I didn't see. When I turned it on, Pat McCormick was doing a real number on Robbie Davies.
I mean, for those that didn't see it, Pat McCormick beat Robbie Davies. Davies probably a little too small to fight McCormick, but it was still an impressive performance by McCormick. Reese Bellotti absolutely demolished Michael Gomez Jr. Looks like a guy that could compete at the world level if you're asking me, but I'm not sure if you're asking me. And Jazza Dickens upset Selfa Barrett in a fight that I did not see going that way, but man, was that fun.
I actually missed that one. I don't know how I missed that one. Was it earlier in the night or earlier in the card?
I guess it was. I watched a highlight package.
Yeah.
My girl, so
I somehow missed that one. I would not have called that.
Good fight, bub. It was a good fight. So that's the undercard of this card. I think Reese Bellotti was the standout performance because that was like a 50-50 to me. He has a journeyman-like record, but he's a very good fighter.
He's got that Maxie Hughes vibe. You know what I mean? Like, he's learned on the go, and at this point, he's a pretty complete guy.
Took real fights, he took real fights. His record doesn't defeat him, so to speak. And so let's see. What if they say in the chat? Finally, Barboza making moves. Top Rank didn't do nothing for, like Oscar did for him. Lindolfo is doing another thing. But nobody talks about Dixon. Yes, everyone runs from Dixon. Who is Dixon?
Not sure, Bob.
Not sure. Observing stuff. Please let us know who Dixon is. Let's go over to the Golden Boy card now.
I need you to take the lead on that one, brother. I only saw the main event.
Well, I mean, I think that's the only one we can really talk about that's like world class. Oscar Duarte's giving me strong Marcos Maidana vibes right now. He's feeling like a puncher, a strong guy, a tough guy, compelling figure. Yeah.
I was actually going to say he was giving me Lucas Matisse vibes because I feel like he throws his punches a little more traditionally than Maidana did. I think what I really like about Duarte, man, is that, there's the obvious things, right? He's a little bit hittable. He's an aggressive action guy, but his footwork has gotten better. He knows how to kind of put guys where he wants to. And surprisingly enough, Madueño was trying to move and use his reach a little bit. So watching him pin Madueño, watching what kind of combinations he throws, like if he's another one. If you give him those moments, he takes them and he unloads combinations. He's not a one punch at a time kind of guy. It's just a real nice variety offensively. And I think, the longer he's with Robert, the more some of the intangibles are helping him to, set that offense up a little better.
Yeah, for me, I think that what I notice is the Robert factor. And maybe that's where I get the Maidana thing, is just that. I look at that.
But he throws beautiful combinations, bro. He's not like a clod.
No, and Maidana Magduno is
Madueño.
Madueño. If if you're not a capable enough operator, you get into a fight of the year. And I thought this was going to be a fight of the year, and he proved he's a capable and competent operator and made this fight uncompetitive.
Yeah. He's one of those action guys that has some vulnerability, but is at a certain level. I think he could be a Lucas Matisse type of contender champion.
Undercard was pretty unwatchable, if we're being honest. It was A-side, B-side fights. Kenny Sims gets a win. Darius Fulgrim gets a win. It was not the strongest undercard, if we're being honest.
I heard that Kenny and Kendo had a pretty fun fight.
Yeah, and it's cautionary, right? Because it seems like Kenny is gearing up to fight Oscar Duarte, and Kendo is a good, solid veteran, but he's not the type of guy you would expect to have a hard fight with Kenny. And there were moments where Kenny was in the pocket going hard with him. And if you think about it, he had that same type of fight with Bekter Akhmedov. So that's 2 out of his last 3 performances, kind of standing in the pocket. Duarte is a guy that's very physical, and I don't think that that's an effective style for Kenny. And given that Kenny's coming off an injury, it kind of raised some concerns for me about where Kenny's going.
Yeah, the injury. I also think that there's that pressure to be exciting, you know, when you're a more technical type guy. And I think maybe he feels like this is how, you know, I can get myself televised, is to convince these guys that I'm an action fighter too. But you're going to get hit more when you try to do that. And, you know, between the injury and, you know, you've spoken to Kenny, we don't know what's going on with his health. I know that he has various sort of health issues that have affected him throughout his career, and we don't know what guys are going through.
Just want him to get an opportunity, because he really deserves an opportunity at this point, and it's taking really, really a long time for him to get to the point where most people get the chance to get a shot at something. And it's unfortunate, right? It's unfortunate.
And all we can hope is that when he does get that opportunity, that he is healthy.
Yep, exactly. That's all we can hope for. So one other thing, I just want the truth brought up. Rohan Polanco in the chat. Rohan Polanco looked phenomenal. He, to me, if you want to talk about breakout guy in 2025, Rohan Polanco has to be at the top of your list as maybe an early prospect of the year type guy.
Especially with welterweight being a fucking dud right now. I mean, he would just be like by far the most exciting thing to happen to welterweight in like 5 years. You know, funny enough, we talked about this when I was at the weigh-in and the presser. If you'd asked me, do you think anybody's going to have a hard time? I would have said him. It looked like he was having a hard weight cut. He's a pretty big guy. I don't know how the fuck he ever would have made 140. He was moving up, you know, in this one. And going in, I was like, all right, if somebody's going to struggle at all, it's going to be him. And that was a struggle-free fight, man. He just came in and walked through this fucking guy. So that's how you know a lot of times if somebody's really talented, when you can tell not everything's going great for them and then they still turn in a performance like that. He's special, bro. I really, really like what I'm seeing from Polanco. And Exhibit A, very slept on. I mean, we forgot to talk about him. I feel bad about it. But I think a lot of people, he sort of slips through the cracks. Hopefully that, you know, stops happening.
That changes soon. We're hoping that changes soon. We in the building expect a longer, more competitive fight. Out of Meduno's tough, but Duarte did really well. Sim's been in the game a long time. Also, that ain't done much for him neither. Wasn't the fight on BLK Prime? Like, who even got that? No, Kenny's fight was on the DAZN. Greg Hackett versus Brian Norman Sr. was on BLK Prime. So let's go to this week's fights. Let's just keep this moving. ProBox TV, we got Gabriel Flores Jr. versus Jose Arellano. A very good fight. Dakota, what do you think of this fight?
I haven't seen Gabriel in a long time. Lukie, you know, I think you know Gabriel a little better than I do, and I would actually.
You feel uncomfortable? I'll take over because I know Gabriel, and Gabriel's he's one of the best fighters.
I don't know enough about the opponent, and you know, you're a little closer to the case on this one.
There's no special effects, but he's a hard worker, and he's coming to win, and he's going to be in shape, and those guys are dangerous. And for Gabriel, you know, he's got to transition into a veteran. He came in the game as the young kid, the kid making all the noise. And now he's in a phase of his career transitioning into a veteran and proving he belongs at that next level. And beating a guy like Arellano is the type of guy that does that, because he beat Oscar Guerrero Alvarado, the very tall guy that we saw in ProBox that's kind of limited. So these are the type of guys you have to beat to prove that you can compete at the highest level. I think it's an interesting fight. And I think that this is what ProBox does time and again, is find compelling matchups that most people wouldn't match and put people in fights. So if I think Gabriel is going to win this fight, and this puts him in the mix for a legitimate top 10 type like fight, or maybe one more fight. But this is the type of fight that Angelo Leo had to win to get back into a title shot. So I think with what we're seeing with Flores is this is an opportunity to get an Angelo Leo type resurrection.
You know, that's part of what happens when you go pro super young. The way some of these guys do is you become that young veteran real early, because you have experiences that other fighters your age generally just don't have, because they may not even be professional yet, you know, particularly if they're coming from other countries. Like you said, this is Gabriel's opportunity to do that, but we've seen guys that take losses. You know, Duarte is a perfect example of that. You know, he was a guy that went pro really young, lost a fight early in his career, and has kind of built himself up, you know, into a better fighter. It happens a lot. It happens a lot.
I mean, this is kind of like a moment for Gabriel, right? So if Gabriel's going to be someone that makes a meaningful impact for our lives in boxing for 5 to 10 years from now, this is a fight he has to win. And best case scenario, he makes an emphatic statement that really, really gets excitement and generates buzz and gets people really, really excited. And they really get going when they see it. So I am quite compelled and excited about seeing what's in store for this fight.
I'm looking forward to seeing him too, man. I haven't seen him fight since probably he was on ESPN.
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be good. It's a good main event. Then we got a good co-feature. Let me read to you the card, because I'm sure you probably don't know the card, and you probably want to know the card, right? I'd assume you want to know the card.
If you're in our chat.
What is it?
I said, if you're in our chat, that's probably exactly what you're here for.
Yeah. Let's see. Word on the street is Abdullah about to fight Giovanni Cabrera. Actually, if you watch the show, his brother actually said that last week. Dang sent to Flores. Ricky Hatton credit. Why are people not giving him credit? Nonito lost his second fight. That's very true. And Nonito works with Gabriel. Let me find.
Didn't Johnny Gonzalez lose his first 4 fights?
A lot of guys lose fights, right? We're just in this era where people look at, oh my God, you're not a polished, undefeated fighter. You must suck. Blah, 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 blah. We got off TV, we got 2 good fights for the local market. Andrew Rodriguez, super flyweight, taking on Kevin Soltero. That's a battle of undefeateds. We got a women's fight 4-rounder, Jenna Creason versus Samantha Ginthian. That's 2 USA Boxing alumni who are undefeated. TV main is Gabriel versus Arellano, followed by a co-feature Emiliano Moreno versus your guy Cesar Francis. And another great one is DeMichael Triggerman Harris is taking on Anthony Too Quick Cuba. And I mean, that is just a stacked card. I think that's one of the better ProBox cards I've seen in some time.
Yeah, bro. Shout out ProBox. They really deliver on one hell of a product.
Now, for my East Coast people, that's going to be 6 o'clock West Coast time. That's 9 for you. So you're going to have to stay up late for that one. That's probably going to be a midnight ending card on the weekday. So that's the only downside, but it's going to be a good one. So there you go for that one. Then we also have, because you like it in order, 360 Promotions is back with Cain Sandoval, now training with Freddie Roach. Any excitement about Cain Sandoval?
That's somebody that you've spent some time with as well, right? Because I haven't seen Cain fight in a while.
I know Cain quite well. I've known him since he was a youngster, and he's got a lot of upside, man. He's a good, aggressive power puncher. He's reckless at times, but reckless in a good way. Hard hitter, and he weaponizes kind of his anger, I would say. There's a level of Benavidez to him where, like, there's a relentless will that goes with the power punching, you know. Exciting fighter. Good matchups. I'd say another one to look for on this card would be Lupe Medina. She has some elements of Sinise Estrada to her. And I would say Abel Mejia is on this undercard. He's another one to watch for. And Daniel Chucky Barrera is in kind of like a 60-40 type fight that's kind of good.
Hell of a card, bro.
It's a very good card, but the card of the weekend, taking the trip with girlfriend Lukie, it's Beterbiev-Bivol II. What are your thoughts going into this card?
Well, let's just keep it a buck, bro. In terms of fight lineups, it's one of, if not the best card that I've ever seen. I mean, it's a historical type of event in terms of the matchups and what the stakes of pretty much every single one of these fights is. I can't think of a card more consequential, honestly. You know, the main event being Beterbiev and Bivol. It's two of the best in the game, bro. You know, again, like you said, when you have evenly matched fights, sometimes what one guy does negates a lot of what the other guy does, and both of these guys are that good that they're able to do that. But how great is it that, again, two top 5 pound-for-pound guys fought in October, and we're getting this rematch already? You know, it just, nothing in boxing in America is moving that quickly right now. And so it's really refreshing.
I'm going to turn the light off behind me because I don't like the...
Yeah, no, it looks like you're going into the light bulb.
Yeah, so I'm going to turn that off. So I get what you're saying. You're speaking philosophical, but what's your breakdown? For me, it's kind of hard for me to not see Beterbiev winning this fight because he got encouraged in that last fight that his power could work. But at the same time, Bivol to me is one of the most underrated fighters. I saw a thing in my newsletter where someone said, what the freak, why is Bivol in your top 5 of your pound for pound list? And I'm like thinking to myself, why wouldn't he be?
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous. I think he's 100% a top 5 pound for pound guy. I think I might have him 3rd or 4th. And I think that's appropriate. I'm going to be honest, bro. I'm leaning Bivol on this one. And I think the reason I'm leaning Bivol is when I watch that fight, I see that Beterbiev is doing exactly what he does. And I think that Bivol is a guy who can make more adjustments. He can make more different types of adjustments. And I just think that in a fight that close, that I felt like Bivol won anyways, I think that he's going to be able to be the one a little younger, a little fresher, that can bring something new. Whereas I think we're going to get the same Beterbiev that we always get, as great as he is. I think that Bivol is going to edge this one.
Okay. Well, that's why we're watching the fight, right?
Because and hopefully it sets up a third one, because it could be, you know, potentially an all-time rivalry.
Let's go big picture, right? Let's go big picture. Greatest light heavyweight is the winner of this in that conversation. Are they that? Because for me, the winner of this fight's the greatest light heavyweight ever.
Well, if Beterbiev wins, I think he very much has that argument. If Bivol wins, I feel like, and particularly if it's close, I feel like that's still an unanswered question that only a third fight could answer. So I think that we're still figuring that part out, but these two guys are certainly in that conversation, you know, with any all-time great heavyweight, including Roy Jones.
It's just, for me, Roy, I don't think of him as a light heavyweight. I don't think that was his best weight class. I think of him as more of a middleweight. But that's fair, you know, light heavyweight, etc. It's going to be a great fight. Hot take. It might not be a fight the fans love. It might look like Jack Catterall versus Arnold Barboza. Like, this might be a very high level fight that isn't two reckless guys just punching.
It's also going to be interesting to see what is the adjustment from Bivol, because if he decides that he needs to be more aggressive, it definitely opens him up to more Beterbiev's offense. Or is he going to try to make it more of an arm's length technical fight than it was the first time? And of course, Beterbiev, between the body punching and the footwork, is not going to let that happen, you know, easily.
Yeah, I mean, that's just frustrating. So, in the chat, they said, will Benavidez fight Beterbiev if Artur wins? Watch a trilogy happen. I hope Bivol wins so he can fight David and David beats him and Canelo looks bad. Roy was undisputed in the 3-belt era at light heavyweight. So I think that if Beterbiev wins, there's some really good conversations to get people mad. And if Bivol wins, we set up the stage for one of the greatest light heavyweight rivalries ever.
Yeah. I mean, I truly think it's that. And prior to that, if we're talking rivalries, I think that you could have made the argument that it was Ward and Kovalev. But I think that the way these two guys are fighting, and particularly, Andre was a career super middleweight, but the level that these two guys are fighting at, there's no doubt that they're some of the best to ever do it at this weight.
Yeah, definitely. Co-feature is Daniel Dubois-Joseph Parker. For me, I really like Joe Parker in this fight. A lot of people are looking at me like a space alien when I say that.
I can't call it, bro. I can't call it because you know how I feel about Joseph Parker, bro. He's a smart fighter. He can do a lot of different things, but Dubois brings a different type of tempo and intensity. Now, listen, Parker can catch him in between all of those big looping shots he throws, but against Big Bang, bro, Big Bang is dangerous and he hits really hard, but he doesn't press a tempo. And I can't, and neither does Deontay Wilder. So it's a different style. While he's fought and beaten some very dangerous punchers in recent years, we have not seen him in with a guy that keeps this kind of tempo since the Joe Joyce fight. And I'm interested to see how he handles it.
It's going to be a good matchup. What's your initial thought on this?
I hate to say it, bro, but my gut tells me that Dubois is going to have a level of intensity that Parker's just a little behind on, and I think that Dubois will win a close decision. I'm definitely not dug in on that, and I'm half-heartedly rooting for Parker because he's kind of had that rough come up, but so is Dubois, man. I mean, these are two guys who really earned their spot. And I think the winner of this fight's the number 2 heavyweight right now.
Very much so. I agree. Shakur Stevenson versus Kids Austin. What do you think of this fight?
I just think Shakur is going to be too much right now, man. I have so much respect for Floyd Schofield for taking this fight. It takes a lot of balls. But I just think that there's going to be maturity and experience gaps here that's tough for him to comprehend right now just because he hasn't had the experience. And I don't think it's going to hurt his career. I think, if anything, it's going to get people's respect. Of course, not everybody's. There's going to be people that go, see, he wasn't all that. But he's a talented kid. He's 22, and he wants to take the best in the world, and you can't hate on that.
There's a chance. I think there's a chance that he gets stopped in this fight. I think Shakur might look like $1 million in this.
It's all about the hands, right? If he's got healthy hands, I think Shakur can beat anybody. If his hands are giving him problems, Schofield is talented enough to make it interesting.
Okay. What about Virgil Ortiz versus Israil Madrimov?
I love this fight, bro. This to me is really the sleeper of the night. Virgil has taken some really tough matchups since his comeback. That Boachuk fight was no joke. And I think he's in for another long night here. I can't – this is another one that I can't call, and that's how it's a great matchup. And the card is filled with fights like that. But I really can't call this one, bro.
To me, I think Virgil should get it done because he seems like he has that second gear, that special fighter gear. But Madrimov is being very underrated coming into this fight. And
Virgil hasn't done 12 rounds with Terrence Crawford, and I think that that's a major experience point for Madrimov that he's going to have, for the rest of his career.
On my newsletter, I talked with Box Rick Gray, and we did an interesting talk, and he kind of brought up a great point where Virgil had a really hard fight in his last fight, and Madrimov probably fought the best fight of his life that he could have. I don't think he could beat Crawford, but he fought as well as he could have against Crawford, and he gave him a really good fight. that means something, right? One guy won, but he's kind of coming off a rough outing. One guy lost, but I think he gained a lot of confidence from it.
Yeah, I think, and honestly too, it's not like Madrimov is old, so I think he's a guy in his prime currently. And should Virgil, if Virgil wins this fight, Virgil's back. In my opinion, he's back in that pound for pound conversation.
Yeah, I mean this vaults him into the big dog category.
I think so.
This is a big dog fight. What are the other fights on this card? I know there's let's go Zhang-Agit K-Bell. What do you think of that?
I just think Agit Kabayel is probably the most slept on guy at heavyweight, and I frankly think he's going to dominate this fight. He's able to push tempo and get on the inside and throw combinations that a lot of heavyweights just don't throw. And Zhang is not a guy, he doesn't keep pace, bro. If he catches Kabayel, Zhang is going to put him out. But I just think Kabayel is going to get in his chest. He's going to make him uncomfortable. He's going to hit him in the body and make him work. And I think he might stop him.
Yeah, it's definitely a rough one, right? It's a rough one because
great matchup, though.
Zhang has all that power, but he doesn't have punch output. So it's like it's hard to bet against a power puncher, but he's probably going to throw maybe 10 or 12 good punches around. And that plays into this guy's hand. But if he gets hit, he's out.
But Caball's a real athlete, bro. He's a real athlete. He knows how to work his way inside. He's got that fluid offense. That's why I think guys like him and, even Usyk, again, they're smaller heavyweights, but they do things that other heavyweights don't do. And we saw him do it against Frank Sanchez. And I think he's going to do it to this guy who's much less mobile and fluid than Frank Sanchez is.
Yeah.
I think Caballel could low-key be one of, if not the best heavyweight outside of Usyk. Like, I would love to see him against the winner of Parker and Dubois.
The fight I'm least excited about is Carlos Adames versus Khamzat Shiraz. To me, this just feels like Shiraz is going to dominate, and this is his moment to kind of get a belt. Very cautionary when Carlos Adames is already complaining about getting into Saudi Arabia on Twitter leading up. It kind of is like, oh man, camp from hell vibes. So what is your thoughts on this one?
Do I love the matchup itself? It's okay, right? But I think what I like about this fight is a notable fight at middleweight happening, a unification fight, if I'm not mistaken. Two of the top guys at the weight. I can't remember the last time we had a top level 50-50 middleweight fight. And if anyone in the chat can remember when the last meaningful top tier middleweight fight was, I'd love to know. But that's what this is. And the winner of this fight has a legitimate case for being the guy at middleweight and starts to build themselves as an attraction. I think that's going to be Khamzat Shiraz. I think he's going to dominate this fight. But Adames is dangerous. He's a world champion for a reason.
You said it perfectly. He's a world champion for a reason. It's not a coincidence that
they don't hand him out at the bodega.
Yeah, they don't just go, hey, man, you're a nice guy. But Khamzat, I believe, is not a champion. I think he might have the IBO title, but he's not an outright champion, widely recognized champion. This is his chance to become a champion. I think Adames just is starting to look not great to me. Terrell Goucher performance wasn't strong. Shiraz against Austin Ammo Williams looked very good. So I think that I'm seeing two guys trend in two different ways.
100%. And Adames, in my opinion, maybe I've just missed fights, but he just hasn't been active in the last few years. And this is not a guy you want to come in with any of your blades dull.
No, not at all. And the last fight we're going to talk about today, before we get into your final questions, throw questions in the chat and then we will get to those. We're kind of, maybe this is the pace we should really move at because we're just getting right to the point very quickly, is Joshua Buatsi versus Callum Smith. That is the last fight we're going to talk about. What are your thoughts on this?
Another one that I can't call. My gut tells me that it's going to be competitive, and then Callum Smith is going to get one of those Callum Smith knockouts. for some of his flaws, he's a vicious puncher. He's had some of the most gnarly knockouts I've ever seen in my life in boxing. And I think Buatsi's really good, but generally speaking, right, like, aren't these the kind of fights that Callum usually wins?
I think so, but at the same time, it's a tough fight. It's a real fight, and I also think Buatsi has a different level than the guys that Callum Smith normally knocks out. I just think that Joshua's been moved very slow. He's fought for 9 years, and he hasn't taken this type of fight, and he was an Olympian. But my gut feeling is Buatsi goes to the next level and wins kind of a very boring fight. But Callum Smith, to me, is up there with Puello and Rohan Polanco as one of these underrated fighters people write off and consistently shows up as a professional.
And maybe the edge that Buatsi has is activity, right? Like, wasn't Callum Smith either briefly retired or he took a bunch of time off after the Beterbiev fight? But again, outside of the Beterbiev and the Canelo fights, all I've ever seen is Callum Smith dominate fights. And I guess the John Ryder fight as well. So maybe if Buatsi can fight that kind of tempo, but in general, it just seems like these are the types of fights he wins, and if Buatsi is a top tier light heavyweight, he's going to win this fight and put himself into the conversation with Benavidez and with Bivol and Beterbiev and Morel and the other top guys of this weight.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting fight. So now let's go to the questions, chat. Thank you for putting up with us. Let's go in there. Dakota, do you want to start going through some of the? Let me go through. So if Virgil Ortiz stops Israel pound for pound status in top 15, thoughts on that?
He's got a real argument, bro. I think that that's possible. Just with the way the Boachuk fight was such a classic, this back to back, he starts being in that conversation about top 15 for sure.
Okay. I think Shakur gets a little hurt. Think he won't think too much of Schofield and go in there and not take him seriously. Thoughts, Dakota?
I don't think that's Shakur's style, man. He's such a careful operator. He's not trying to get hit, dude. I don't think he's going to go in there and take anybody light.
I think it's the opposite. I think if anything, he'll start very, very slow, knowing that Floyd Schofield can punch. And I think that he's going to probably wait until he feels Schofield starting to slow down. I'm seeing Shakur doing a strategic body attack, a la Andre Ward, and picking it up in that 8, 9, 10 rounds. And if we're being honest, he didn't have a very good last fight, Schofield. He got dropped. He missed the stool. So I think there's a lot Shakur learned from that is later in the fight, Schofield did show fatigue.
I think the flip side to that argument, just doing devil's advocate, is Shakur's last 2 fights have been probably his worst performances. And so there are some questions for him to answer in this fight as well.
It's his hands. We got to see if he feels comfortable punching.
And his tempo. I think the tempo he's fought his last couple fights at, there will be guys that can kind of out hustle him.
This is true. So Janibek is unified. The winner needs to see him. Thoughts?
I think the winner needs to see Lara too.
That's true. Okay.
I think Janibek and Lara is sort of the unsung fight at middleweight.
I think it's a good matchup, not 50-50, but sort of a crossroads fight. Gotta love the narrative. I believe they're talking about Callum Smith and Joshua Buatsi in fighting. I think that's
definitely the best Brit light heavyweight.
If Beterbiev wins again, can we put the question to rest that finally Artur Beterbiev is the greatest? I think he is the greatest light heavyweight if he wins this, especially if he wins it in a dominant fashion. He won all but one of his fights or 2 of his fights by knockout and basically held a belt for 8 or 9 years straight and, didn't really avoid people. If anything, people avoided fighting him.
And you could probably count on your 2 hands the number of rounds he lost.
I mean, it's kind of, in my opinion, hard to argue otherwise unless you're going with someone that had just a lot more activity. I think Callum Smith will edge it, said Boxing Learner. Our guy Martin
I also think it's funny, though, when like an old head is like, oh, he couldn't beat Bob Foster. I'm like, if you don't think Beterbiev could beat Bob Foster, like, I don't know what we're doing, bub. Ooh, we lost Lukie here. We lost Lukie. We got the technical difficulties bug that we haven't had in so long. Martin Mulligan said, great boxing chat from Lukie and Dakota every week. Catterall put a glass eye to sleep. Well, I appreciate you, Martin Mulligan. We do what we can. Listen, it was a more technical type fight. There's no way around it. It was a more technical type fight. It was a game of inches. But that's what happens when you put, two sharper guys. Lukie, we got you back.
My Wi-Fi went out, so we're going to just take one last thing, and then we're going to go. Should Virgil rematch Surhai if he wins against Israel?
I wouldn't mind seeing that. I mean, that was a real 1-2 point kind of fight. I would not mind seeing that as a rematch. And I think that Boachuk, I can't remember who he fought his last fight against, but he was fucking tremendous in that fight.
Okay, well, it looks like the show is about to end. So
I guess the last point that I would want to throw to you, Lukie, is do you think Terrence will ever fight at 154 again after Canelo?
I think Terrence has one fight left, and it's Canelo. And if he wins that, maybe he'll do one more against somebody. But I really think Terrence just wants to fight Canelo, and then his career's over. So I think guys are going to call him out because he's a very famous, very good fighter. But I don't think so.
I agree. I would love to see Virgil against Jesus Ramos. That's really the super fight down the road that I think is
banger
is brewing.
Okay, well, Dakota, tell people how they can support you.
You can always support me at the Slip and Weep Podcast, at ITR Boxing. Watch me on the Lukie Boxing Show every week. And next week, I have a double episode with both Rihanna Rios and Justin Paldo of the Slip and Weep Podcast. That'll be out on Wednesday. So check that out.
Okay, happy Valentine's Day, and we will be back at some point next week. Take care, guys.